Welcome once again to our session on diversity. Quite appropriately, we've got a diverse panel from both commercial and non-commercial radio, and today's moderator is Christoph Mallet, Executive Producer of Audio and Language Content for SBS Radio. Welcome, Christoph.
Thank you, and thank you for coming and listen to us talking about diversity. I've also bringing the accent as well into this room. We decided to have this discussion about how diversity is becoming the norm, and this is very much what we do at SBS. So, but in the panel today, we have Alana Howe, you're from Nova. Yep. We got Andrea Ho from ABC in Canberra. We got Barry Lee, all the way from Cairns, broadcaster. And then we got Mandy Weeks, which is also my boss. So we have a few stats that we will put on the screen here. So from the ABS and from the statistics we can collate, this is what Australia is today. So Australia is pretty much divided 50-50 between male and female. And when we start drilling into some of the data we get, then we start to find some very interesting facts about how diversity is the new norm. We can look at 46% of all the employees in Australia are women, but there's only 15% of them that are CEOs. So there's a great diversity that is missing here, okay? We've got an average, the women are earning 16% less than men per week, which is a very large number when you start looking into it. Up to 11% of the Australians are identified as LGBTQI, sorry. And then we've got 14% of the Australians that have disability. Some of the 3% of Australians' population is Indigenous. And nearly 50% of Australians were born overseas, or at least have one parent that was born overseas. So that's roughly 10 million people. Okay, so we're talking a large number of people that have a background from somewhere else than Australia. 5 million Australians speak a language other than English at home. This is also a very large number when you start thinking about the proportion on the population. And this is the number that everybody, I think, is interesting about. Australian consumers with a different background basically spend $96 billion a year, and that's billion with a B. So that's a number that should speak to everybody. And that drives my first questions, and I'm going to do some good old sucking up to your boss, international sucking up to your boss. First question for Mandy. Clearly the diversity is the right thing to do. We can also say it's the smart thing to do, I guess.
I think that's right. I think those stats pretty much show that, you know, it's not just a big group hug, really. It's basically who we are, and it is the makeup of Australia to be diverse. And I guess, and it's the smart thing to do. So, you know, if we talk about the two major KPIs I think that we've all got, which is pretty much around audiences and revenue, there's probably a couple of points I'd make about that. And I think in terms of audiences, I think the radio industry is fantastic at research. We research everything. We know, you know, the gender of our audiences, the age, what they're going to buy next. But how many of you really understand the cultural makeup of your audiences? And I guess from the position I'm in now at SBS, we do a lot of research. And I can tell you that a lot of commercial radio audiences, we know, are made up of very culturally diverse backgrounds. And so imagine, you know, understanding the cultural makeup of your audiences in order to be able to be that even more positive and inclusive of those audiences, and I guess make your brands even stickier to those audiences. A good example recently is I got some research back about the Korean-speaking audience in Australia. Do you know what the #1 station is for them? Smooth FM. Mm-hmm. So I don't think Smooth would know that, but what a great opportunity to understand who is listening, and a lot of them are small business owners, so that probably accounts for that as well. But to be inclusive and to try and, you know, reflect some shared experiences, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about this, or, you know, have the voices on the air, will go a long way to really deepening that engagement with those audiences. And then in terms of revenue, the 96 billion that you mentioned there, again, knowing the cultural makeup of your audiences, you can really start to go after advertisers who very much want to understand, are more and more understanding, you know, which cultural communities they can actually push harder with their brands to generate more revenue. And again, a great example I'll give you is Telstra, right? We all grew up with Telstra. We think that's one of the biggest brands in Australia. But most migrants arrive in Australia, no idea. That's very much a homegrown brand. So they arrive in Australia thinking, well, I better sign up with Vodafone because that's the global brand. So again, if you understood your audiences and your cultural makeup, you could go to a Telstra and say, you know, we have a significant number of people that you would be wanting to connect with commercially, and we can make that happen through our commercial radio station. A really great opportunity just by looking at those stats.
Absolutely. Andrea, just a quick question for you. Diversity has been around for years. Why are we talking about it just now?
Well, I think that the answer there is also in the figures, Christophe, that you presented, and that is to say those figures are a snapshot in time. That's where Australia is at the moment. But we don't live in a snapshot of time. We are actually living in a continuum of change. And so things were perhaps a little less diverse if we want to think about culture. Certainly they were less diverse in terms of gender 20 years ago, and you can see the direction in which we're heading. So I think that the reason why we're talking about it is because we can't necessarily make the same assumptions about our audience that we used to when we all started in this industry, because our audience current and our audience's potential are changing. And I think the bracket around the area of potential is the one most interesting to all of us, because of course we're all chasing more. We're all trying to replace audience that we're losing. We're all trying to understand the audience that we're losing in order to draw them back. And those people are not necessarily the same as you and I. And I think that that's something that we really do have to tackle. That's one of the areas. The other one, which is happening concurrently at the same time, is the change in technology. So, as people come to Australia, as Mandy said, you know, they come to Australia not necessarily having to take what we gave them, which was the case even up to 10 or 15 years ago. They can now choose a world of media, including a world of audio from somewhere else. So we have to work a little bit harder to reach the people who are here in Australia. And that's our challenge, I think. I mean, you know, yes, we can talk about the social good, and I think there's a good argument both for and against the reasons why we might want to do it. But the business reasons, I think, are uncontroversial now. And I think that it's a very easy argument to prosecute, or it should be for your sales team.
Yeah, absolutely. Question to all of you. I mean, you mentioned the technology.
Yes.
The opportunity is there for a network like Nova, for example, to, via the technology, maybe use of podcasts to increase the diversity, maybe not just the platformist vision of AM, FM, DAB, but through technology to use this and increase the diversity that a network like Nova may deliver.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think technology, we should be using that as an enabler. And I think that radio is not consumed, you know, in the way that it always was. And I think for us that just is an opportunity. And we should be looking at where we can commercialise that opportunity and absolutely embrace the technology that's going to give us that reach. You know, we shouldn't ignore the capability that would give us. And it's definitely something I think that we're looking at in terms of podcasts and what our reach would be and what the content should be. In order to get the best reach.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely I think we should be embracing the use of technology.
Absolutely. Barry, for you, give us your thoughts about what is it to be an Indigenous broadcaster or an employee in a commercial radio world?
I basically came from a community radio station and then wanted to see what it was like to try to break into the commercial side of things. So I was fortunate enough to get a job up in Cairns, and that was just a personal thing that I wanted to do. So in answering that sort of question, I can't speak on behalf of all Indigenous people. I can only speak on behalf of myself. And I think it's important with regards to commercial side of things, you've got to look at your specific region. Like in Cairns, there is a high population of Indigenous people. So I think Grant Broadcasters, or you know, especially Star 102.7, where I am, have looked at that and taken that on board. So it's important for you to get the message out to that community, that specific community. But you know, whether that would work in another place, I'm not sure. But yeah, man, I love the fact that I'm on air up there. And I think it's an important role, specifically for Cairns.
Andrea, you had something to...
Christophe, I think this is a very interesting dichotomy that we've got here. I think that it's interesting to talk about podcasts as a space in which you can try something new and different. And it is. I mean, podcasts are, in that sense, the new midnight to dawn. You know, that's a place where you can try some new ideas, try some new talent, see how it goes down, and technology's great for that. But why are we looking at diversity as being a niche area? I mean, we've just seen some figures that talk about how 50% of Australians have either a parent born overseas or others are themselves born overseas. Australians, 30% of us are from a non-Anglo background. 30%, 1 in 3 Australians. I'd say more than 1 in 3 in this room, probably because that's where your area of interest is. So in fact, Barry's radio station has done the right thing. They've put him onto the afternoon program for 5 hours. That seems like the way that diversity should be going. That in fact it's actually just a part of business as usual. So I think that podcasts are your experimental space to do things that are really pushing the envelope. But this is not pushing the envelope, or it shouldn't be. And if it is, I think you need to look at your business model.
Absolutely.
Also, speaking about diversity, not only with regards to race or gender, but diversity within the industry. I mean, it's not all about being a broadcaster. That was what I chose to do. But within the industry itself, you know, as you said, there's social media, there's behind-the-scenes sort of stuff, production and things like that. So speaking about diversity about race, it's not all about, like I can tell you now, Indigenous people predominantly are shy, so they wouldn't feel comfortable speaking in front of people like this, wouldn't feel comfortable speaking on air, wouldn't feel comfortable speaking in front of a camera. But behind the scenes, you know, there'd be some very good people with regards to the social media side of things, or production, or just doing research for the on-air producers, or on-air broadcasters, to give them the actual facts of whatever the topic may be. So there's a diverse range of jobs that they can do within just this industry alone.
And actually, that's a good point, because Alana, you had a good point around the. In terms of the company, what are your culture or the policy to support this in terms of hiring the right people on air or off air or behind the scenes?
Sure, and I couldn't agree more, because I think that diversity in the organisation should breed diversity of thought, and therefore could have trickle-on effects. And I think for me, I talk about policy and culture, and I think policy sets the intention. I think there needs to be some sort of framework that sets an intention in a business, say this is what we stand for and this is what we accept and don't accept. But I think it falls flat if the culture doesn't support it. And I think that comes down to the value set of the organisation, the leadership in that organisation. And one of our values is, you know, we are challengers, and, you know, we want to challenge that status quo. And I think that some of those cultural levers need to be in existence for us to challenge our thinking and think a little bit, you know, more outside the box. So I think that combination of policy and culture is really important, and culture is a hard one, you know, to get right. But I think at Nova we've got a strong culture, and I think that we can only leverage on that to then bring our policies to life. And I think in the recruitment space, I think that's a huge area of focus for me. And I think when we're talking about diversity, it needs to be a huge focus. And look, I would, you know, I think be frank and say that my experience around media, music industry, and now radio is, you know, my impressions is we're not completely sophisticated in the way that we recruit. And, you know, there's huge improvements to be made there. And I think one of the things that we've done at Nova is look at a capability framework, a criteria for recruiting on merit. And I think in the industry, again, just my observations, at times it's, that's a good guy. Yeah, I think he'd do a great job. He's a good guy. He's a good guy, Alana. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I understand he's probably a great guy, but he may not have the skills or capabilities to actually do that job. So let's talk about the skills and the capabilities, and let's recruit under that. So I think there's a lot of, you know, still, you know, good mate, you know, had a beer with him, and I think I just work really well with him, Alana. Yeah. And again, I get that. So I think instilling a little bit of sophistication in recruitment, but what we've also built is a capability framework, which actually clearly spells out the skills and capabilities required, both at a core level and also at a leadership level, to start that sophistication around recruitment and build the recruitment questions to test that at interview stage. So we're sort of at the beginning of that stage by putting that into practice and embedding that into the organisation. But I think that's at least a first step, at least at Nova, to up sophistication around our recruitment so that it becomes merit-based. And I think, you know, I'm really interested when I read things around the sort of the blind recruitment practices, and I really read that with interest, and that's something that's piqued my kind of, I guess, focus as to what would be the next level for us. And I think removing those identifiers around gender and race and that sort of thing is a really interesting area. So for me, starting at merit-based recruitment, I think, is our obvious first step up the sophistication, and then what do we do even more so to push that barrier around removing that unconscious bias, which I think, definitely exists at times.
Absolutely. And I think, Mandy, you probably have a vision on this, because I know from the inside that SBS has done enormous work on the culture over the last few years.
Yes. I mean, I think by the nature of the organisation, we are very diverse. We absolutely over-index in the number of staff who have come from a different cultural background, which is fantastic, but we are starting to also benchmark ourselves against all the other indicators that were covered off in those stats. So we know that in terms of LGBTQI, we again over-index against the national average, which is fantastic. But in terms of disability, with 14% of Australians having a disability, we know that actually we need to be more open to that in our organisation and start to work on ways of bringing other employees into the business. So, yeah, we're very, very much aware of that and ensuring that we are, I guess, thought leaders in this area, being SBS and being the broadcaster for diversity. But I think there's plenty of other things we're doing in terms of understanding diversity at the leadership level and understanding the different perspectives, which you touched on a little bit at the start, in terms of every day there's a new perspective around that people from a different cultural background bring to the leadership table. Simple things from how audiences are thinking and feeling, and that can then influence our content, right through to silly things like prizes and which prizes you give away. I mean, we would all think, great, let's give away an iPhone, that'd be awesome. But people from an Asian Australian background often prefer a Samsung, basic things like that. So we've got to be really smart about thinking about each community and actually what is going to engage them in terms of deepening our engagement with those audiences and ultimately growing them. So it is always outcomes based with what we do.
Okay, Andrea, you've done some research and you recently got a prize for your research in the UK and Sweden, I believe. What do we know of what's happening elsewhere in the world? Like we know the centre of the world. What's happening anywhere else?
Well, I was fortunate to receive a Churchill Fellowship, thank you, and I did go to have a look at practical strategies for increasing diversity in broadcast media, and I looked at UK and Sweden. And on the question of recruitment, I mean, this is a very interesting thing because, as any of you who've had anything to do with the ABC will be aware, we've been playing in the space of merit-based recruitment since forever. That's the way that we do stuff. But it hasn't necessarily made us any more diverse. And yes, we're a very open organisation, and I've personally never felt any barriers that have been imposed by the organisation on myself because of my gender or my race. I mean, how deep do you want to dig into it, whatever. But I think that we've got to look at something a little bit more sophisticated because it clearly hasn't solved all of our problems. And I think if any of us were to be honest and, maybe depending on what department you are in SBS as well, maybe you do or don't have this kind of issue, but for the rest of us, I think if you're sitting in your own workplace and you have a look at all your colleagues and they're all great people and we're all good mates and we work together well, but then if you go downstairs and you have a bit of a look, I mean, you just have to walk along South Wharf here and it doesn't look like the people who are inside this conference, That's the reality of Australia as it is today. So we really, I think, are going to have to do a body of work around recruitment and merit, which is a little bit more sophisticated. I think we have some blind spots around what merit actually looks like, because merit is just a construction too. It's just what we think is the right thing. But if we're kind of getting the same result, then there must be something a little bit wrong with that. So that needs a little bit of effort. And in places like Sweden, for example, the Swedish public broadcaster, they actually include capacity for diversity as some of their merit points that they have. And you sort of say to yourself, well, how can you do that? How can you include diversity as being something that you recruit for? It's a bit ephemeral. How do we do that? Well, we recruit every day on ephemeral concepts in our industry. We recruit on newsworthiness. Does a person know what a news story looks like? We recruit on creativity. We recruit on good teamwork. We recruit on lots of things that you don't get a degree in, that you can't show that you've got a skill for. And yet, we can recruit on those things because we can say, show us some evidence. And it's okay to ask for the things that you need in your job. And so based on that, the Swedish broadcasters say, well, it's okay for us to ask for capacity for cultural diversity. So as an example, they might say an applicant should show capacity for cultural diversity. Maybe they give 3 indicators. They say you could come from a culturally diverse background, one or two, both of your parents or you have come from another country. Or you can have a lived experience of cultural diversity. You live in a very diverse suburb and, you know, that kind of thing. Or you have a learned capacity. You might speak another language. And so it doesn't automatically exclude natural Swedes, if you want to look at it that way, from applying for a job. You just have to show capacity in one of those things. So it is possible to do. And I think that for us to progress this issue properly in Australia, that's something that we're going to have to look at.
I was also going to say, just on recruitment, you know, I think it's up to the industry also to work with the training organisations, so the universities, and I know Lisa Sweeney from AFTRS is in the room, and we're working with Lisa at the moment to try to offer an opportunity to someone from a diverse background to come through their sort of prestigious course to then come and, you know, work with us. And I think we also work with Monash and Deakin. Again, if we pair up and really encourage diversity, then they will also put a focus on that in terms of the students that come through who will ultimately end up in the industry.
Okay, and I think that brings me a question to Barry.
Yes.
You've got a background in sport.
Yes.
Other like football, rugby, AFL, they've been really good at including younger generation. What can commercial radio or radio as itself do?
I think, well, just in the simplest terms, what we're just discussing, you don't win grand finals by picking a good bloke. You win grand finals by picking the right person for the job. So unless they can do the job, then you're not going to pick them no matter what their colour, no matter what their background, if they can't do the job. The rugby union is sort of my background, and I had the pleasure and the honour of playing for the Wallabies. But there were guys, Indigenous people, who'd been there before me. So the three Ella brothers, the Lloyd Walkers, the Andrew Walkers, you know, Lloyd McDermott was the first Indigenous player for the Wallabies. They'd all done the hard yards, so to speak, before me. At the moment, and I guess in some ways I'm sort of hoping to open that door for the next generation of Indigenous youth or Indigenous people in general, just to if they want to take that step to become a broadcaster in the commercial industry, then, you know, that's great. I never had to come up against any of the racial sort of things that some people have had to in sport. I guess the only thing that sort of came close to it was in France, in your country. We were on a tour, and Bob Dwyer was the coach, and Bob Dwyer had the pleasure of coaching the Ella brothers, the Lloyd Walkers, and people like that. So, and those guys were just freaks, like as in just they were magic. Their hands were just beautiful. And then he got to me, and I played on the wing. So we're doing this training drill in France and passing the ball out, and he's going yes, 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 and got to me, and I dropped the ball, and he goes, "Oh, Barry," like he said some other expletives, and he said to me, "Barry, what happened? I thought all you black fellas had good hands." And I said, "Yeah, Bob, but the part I catch the ball with is white." So, yeah, but that was quite possibly the only sort of racial thing. But no, I've never had an issue with it. But yeah, I think it's important for someone to at least, you know, start the wave, and hopefully in this industry, hopefully I'm a trailblazer.
A quick question to Mandy. You come from a commercial radio background. You've been at SBS for a few years now. Has your vision on diversity changed since you've been working for SBS?
Absolutely, yeah. So I had sort of 20-odd years in commercial radio, and I think, yeah, the most we talked about in terms of diversity was gender diversity, and there was a lot of discussion about that, which is great. But yeah, certainly being at SBS, I've realised, you know, really, as Andrea said, you step out in the street and actually the world is just diverse. Australia is diverse, and therefore we've got to be thinking about that, and we need to reflect that in our content, and we need to, you know, we don't have enough accents on the radio. I mean, yes, certainly from an audience perspective, you've got to be able to understand them, but to give a different perspective and be more inclusive will actually, you know, really aid social cohesion in this country. And I think when big things break around the world, like the Paris bombings, etc., you know, I don't think organisations here take enough time to actually talk to the communities that live here about how they've been impacted by those world events. You know, what a great angle on the content. The Nepalese earthquake, how did the Nepalese community feel here? But you don't ever hear that really on commercial radio. You know, we just hear from the Prime Minister and we don't get those human stories. But because Australia is, you know, the most multicultural country in the world, wherever something breaks around the world, there is absolutely an impact here. And you get real stories, great stories, right here under our noses that we're missing those opportunities to share them with the wider Australia and to bring that into our lounge rooms. So it's given me a different perspective, and in terms of just simple things like, you know, my nostalgia is not your nostalgia. You didn't watch Kylie and Jason get married on Neighbours.
Actually, I did, but
Oh,
that's a different story.
Well, sorry about that. We're sorry we did that to
That's
you.
a completely different story, which I'm not going to
You
go
know,
into.
so if we draw on that, you know, it doesn't mean it's wrong. That's certainly a part of Australia's
No, it's pretty
psyche,
wrong.
and that should never be thrown away. But again, in terms of engaging and being inclusive with audiences, what are their shared experiences that we can draw on, and not just assume that, as I say, the Australian cliches are something they even understand what we're talking about. You know, your neighbour may not quite understand Anzac Day yet. You know, so I think I just love the industry to just open up and realise this, and then again, as I say, just tap into the potential then of that understanding. It's exciting and phenomenal. So I feel really privileged every day to get that exposure through having such a diverse workplace.
A question for you all. Do you think TV is further ahead than radio in terms of the diversity? I mean, I just preach for me, but like you get Manu forefronting My Kitchen Rules, you would not get a French person doing the breakfast show on Nova, for example. So has TV done a better job, or what's the difference?
Well, I'll just give you a quick observation, hand over to Andrea. Watching TV last night, I was thinking exactly that, and I actually found the ads to be more diverse than the programming. You know, really, some of the best ads around now are very, very diverse. You know, the meat ads, the footy ads, the Australia Post ads, incredibly diverse and beautifully produced. And then you get into your mainstream programming, and apart from, well, reality shows are more diverse now, but everything else I think is pretty white bread.
Yeah. Anybody else got a different opinion on this?
Well, different, I think, a little bit different, a little bit the same. We were talking about the ads earlier, and believe me, if your advertisers are going there and you're not, you are behind, right? Those guys know where the money is. For me, I think it's less about are we doing it better or worse than I would say TV has an easier time, because you know what, you can just put somebody on who looks a little bit different, and it's pretty obvious. In radio, you can sound like Barry or you can sound like me, and nobody would know. You can sound like Mandy, that nobody would know that you're from a diverse background. You know, you can't see us on the radio. So the subtlety is greater. It is bringing that awareness of a different background or different understanding of Australia and your experience of Australia. So it comes out over time. It doesn't make it any less relevant. You don't have to stick an accent on the air just to make yourself more relevant. So I do think that that's maybe the challenge for radio. But believe me, I wouldn't say that Australia is out of the woods by any means. I was overseas on this Churchill Fellowship at the time when the Logie finalists were announced, and it was the talk of the television industry over there. They just went, oh my God, Australia is upset that there are 2 people nominated for the Gold Logie who are not white. You know, hashtag Logie's so white. They were all talking to each other about this, just going, wow, like we look at Neighbours and we look at Home and Away and we think that they're pretty backwards, and now we've got proof. And I was so ashamed because, you know, they're asking me, why is it like this? So television in Australia has a long way to go too.
Yeah, I basically had the same thing happen. I just finished doing Australian Survivor over in Samoa, and that was one of the hashtags and one of the big
Why did
issues.
you get so many speaking parts on that, by the way? I'm watching it at the moment. I'm like, where's Barry? Like, if they never put any of him on, did they cut you out?
Pretty much. Yeah, it's
Serious?
Yeah, because I didn't play the game. The way I played the game was just to be honest with integrity and stuff like that.
Well,
and
that's not playing the game.
Yeah, I know, and so that never made it. So
Haven't you watched Survivor before?
I know, it's rubbish.
Mate.
Yeah, you know, don't watch it. Turn off your TV.
I'd love it. It's great.
But no, I had the same sort of thing. They out of all of the contestants, there was one black guy. You know, the token black guy, which was me, and they probably picked the worst one because I can't start a fire. I'm scared of the dark. I'm scared of my own shadow. So
You said you were scared of the dark.
mate, I did. I would have told them the truth, and that was the way I played the game. And apparently, the truth doesn't help you win. But you know, it's one of those things that sort of came up. What we're just talking about.
Yeah, I'm amazed at how little there is of you in the series. Seriously, I'm watching it. Yeah. Like we love Survivor at our house, but there was very little of you.
I was running around in. I had a pair of fluorescent
we could see
budgie
you.
smugglers. And that doesn't make good TV, apparently. So
Righto.
I wouldn't want to see that. So save yourself your eyes.
I do feel like too that I think we can be a little bit insular, and I think just even outside of the diversity, topic, I think that we're a small industry, and I think people who are in the industry have been in there for some time, and even just the diversity in employment backgrounds. I sort of find a lot of people have been in the industry for some time, so sometimes that fresh thinking isn't there, and what could we do differently, and and I think that I've never worked in TV, but I think for TV we've been quite successful, and I think that we get sort of trapped into that sort of, well, it's worked for now, we're doing all right, why change? And I guess from an HR perspective, we're often trying to drive those people issues where some of our audience don't always have the commercial understanding that we need to push. Is for every, I guess, fluffy HR initiative or cultural initiative for my hard-nosed sort of finance or commercial friends, there has to be that commercial business case. And I think that maybe we haven't done a good enough job around that. And like you say, advertisers, surely that that their sort of bread and butter is making that money. So why aren't we taking that lead? And I think for us in organisations, I think we are a little bit insular, and I think we're just doing what we've always done, and they've been successful. So I sort of feel like there's that need for that commercial business case to kind of smash through that and actually create that catalyst for different thinking. Because at the moment, I think they're sitting going, well, we're fine looking around, and yes, we're all white middle-aged men, but we're sort of doing okay. And I think to crash through with that absolute cut-through commercial business case is what might move the more corporate commercial, boards and senior exec groups.
Okay. We only have a few minutes left. I was just wondering if there's questions from the floor.
There must be heaps, right? Come on.
Questions around here. So we've got 3 questions. Name and publication.
Mark Cummins, SBS. It was just on a question on that. If we've just heard earlier this morning that in the commercial space we're ruled by a Anglo-Saxon 27-year-old young man who lives in Sydney, is there any role for us, or is there anything that an open question that we could do to affect them who are buying the media and then really sort of dictating to the business people in the industry what's normal?
Yeah. Oh, did you want to go?
I was going to say they can just sit downstairs at Ultimo at the ABC in Sydney for half a day and just watch who walks through. It doesn't look like them. And those are people walking from Central Station to UTS to TAFE. They're going to be the next generation, and they're not very far away because they're in tertiary education. They're the next generation of people who are turning on the radio, who are buying products, who are making decisions in their lives that we're trying to make an impact on. They're 2, 3, 4 years away from that kind of autonomy at most. Sit them there for a bit. By the way, sit some of my staff down there too.
I think it's also about us connecting with the client, not just the advertisers, the agencies, because more and more clients, as we're seeing in the ads, are actually demanding an element of diversity in their advertising because they've seen the value of it, and they know that there are big markets that they can tap into with specific products for sure. So connecting with the clients, I think, ultimately will put pressure also on the agencies, and we've seen that quite a bit, where certain corporate clients now want to buy specific in-language radio programs for that very reason, and they're seeing great results. Okay. So,
look, I mean, more realistically, one other thing I would add is if the buyers are very homogenous, look somewhere else for different buyers. Or if you don't find the different buyers, hire some of your own and get them to go out there, because you can't expect people to learn all the new things that you want at once. And we all operate from our own personal experience. And if you've got a very homogenous group, they're not going to be able to stray very far outside their known experience, particularly if you continue to reward them with the dollars. How about you just find yourself somebody new?
Okay. I think we had another question here. And then we'll have another one here after that.
Hi there. I'm going to stand up. Lisa Sweeney from Afters. Forward promote. I'm on this afternoon. Secrets of a Successful Air Checker.
Go to Lisa's session. It'll be great.
Thank you. Moving on. We have coming up a much more diverse workforce, we hope, in the future. But I just wanted to make an observation. We have a lot of contact with industry throughout the year. We take our students on station visits right across the spectrum in Sydney. So this year we have been thinking very much with the diversity cap on, and we've been observing when we go into stations how interesting it is that we do not have that diversity in the workspaces. Absolutely, in the ABC you can see it, at SBS you can see it. There's great diversity work being done there. But at every other station that we go to, the workforce is so homogenous, it's incredible. Right down to everybody's wearing the same clothes and got the same haircuts. And it's just, I think, a really, really challenging thing for us.
I know how they feel. Kansas, just dreadlock holiday.
Well, obviously, Barry.
We love it.
So what I wanted to say was we're really reaching out and searching hard for this, and we'd really love to have the support from the network. So the people who are in this room, I'm gathering, are interested in diversity. If you can have a talk to us at Afters, we want to help. And it is very interesting the way when you just start to reach out, even it's almost intuitively, we've found this year, without doing a lot of specific advertising, we've had a much more diverse bunch of people come through Open Day, which we are really thrilled about. So I think there are things that we can do that are very simple, where we start to attract people in easier ways than we're imagining.
And just adding to what Lisa said, at SBS we've done a lot of independent research, comparing the mind and mood of Australians and, the mind and mood of people from a cultural background versus the general population. And in terms of employees, they absolutely over-index, way in terms of optimism, in terms of entrepreneurial spirit, in terms of feeling that Australia has a brighter future. They absolutely see themselves as Australians through and through. 30% of people from migrant backgrounds say they are Aussie first and foremost. Another 45% say they're Australian with a cultural background. And there's only about 20% of migrants who actually say don't quite feel Australian yet. So it's a real indication that, these people are Australian and they come with great attributes and values, and the things that they can bring into your workplace will absolutely make your network a better business.
These people are us.
Yeah.
That's right.
We have one last question.
Hi, my name's Louis Zaka from XFM in Taree. My question to the panel is there more of a focus on diverse personalities or diverse content?
Both.
It's a good question. We grapple with that one at the moment. I mean, clearly you've got to have both, but the question is, can you have truly representative, diverse content without the diverse people? It's otherwise, to be frank, and let's be blunt here, it's just white people talking about coloured people, or it's just blokes talking about women, or whatever the case may be. But if you don't have the content in the first place, why on earth would someone who's not working in your industry or at your station want to come and work with you? So you've probably got to work on the two of them hand in hand, knowing that you're probably not going to get the content quite right till you get the people right, knowing that you won't get the people you want until you do some content. So I think that the two of them really do come together that way.
Okay.
I think, it's sort of putting both of your questions together. Just from my point of view, from an Indigenous point of view, you've got two circles. So you've got a black circle here and a white circle here. And the closer you get them together, there's a grey area in the middle. If you can get someone that is comfortable in that grey area, which I've done throughout my life, and pulling in both sides of those things to make it, that grey area become bigger, that's where you're going to start to make changes. How you do that is up to the individual, not up to the colour of your skin or something. It's how you approach whatever topic it may be.
Okay. I think that's a nice way to finish. Thank you to our panel. Thank you for coming. And I think it's time to go for lunch. So I wish you bon appétit.
Absolutely. Thanks, Christoph. Thanks, panel.